JJK is a series rife with intrigue and mystery. Some questions are big and some small. Many things are vague, seemingly just because. The uncertain is certainly a theme in this world. But one question has been so trivialized, memed, and fought over that a lot of the nuance has fallen to the wayside. That question being simply, are Gojo and Geto gay? The debate online about where these two men fall exactly on the scale between friends and lovers has been kinda muddied in terms of discourse. The people who want the two to be lovers refuse to see the story any other way, but so do the people vehemently against this idea. To some, it isn't even a question, and to others, the question itself kind of is the answer. Many might argue that the two don't do anything in this series overtly romantic towards each other, so what's the point of even discussing this? I mean, in Gojo's past arc, we even find out that he has the beautiful Waka Inui as his phone's lock screen, which narrows our options down to the guy being straight and a little zesty, or a bisexual icon. Bicon? But taking that one piece of evidence and extrapolating it to the rest of the series would be doing Gege's writing a massive disservice. He's constantly walking this slack line of keeping them friends, but implying that they're a little bit more than that. For reasons we'll touch on very soon, sometimes you need to learn to dig past the surface level and look between the lines to see the implications at hand. Because for how vague they keep this topic, there's a shocking amount to say. The reason this is so surprising to some is because Jujutsu Kaisen is really anything but a romance story at first glance. But that doesn't mean it's something that our kitty mangaka never touches on, it's just almost never the focus of what's happening. This is a very common argument for the people who think that they're just friends and nothing more, that JJK is not a love story, but this line of reasoning doesn't really get you very far at all. The biggest exception to that train of thought is Rika, but I think there's something interesting hidden behind the scenes there, in context. Many know this piece of trivia, but in case you don't, Yuta was at one point in time the protagonist of this series, but him and Megumi being so similar and Gege wanting to explore a more optimistic character made him eventually change that. I'm not exactly sure how far into JJK's development Akutami got before making the decision to swap Yuta for Yuji, but this tells us something kind of important. Jujutsu Kaisen's main character was originally all about love, the curse of love, the power of love, the meaning of loneliness, etc. So to say that this series has no room for a romantic plotline, or to say that it's something the series has never had in its DNA is just very incorrect. Now, plenty of things may hint that Gojo is a lot less straight than he lets on, sharing a bike with Geto, their general touchy-feeliness with each other, but is there any real narrative weight to the idea of this being actually true? Well, one of, if not the biggest piece of evidence for these two's relationship being more than just fanon, is what Gojo says to Yuta after the events of JJK0. Okotsu, mentally distraught after the whirlwind of love and tragedy that has been his entire cataclysmic life up to this point, needed his teacher, his guardian practically, to help him through what he was feeling. Gojo listfully responds with the phrase, "Love is the most twisted curse of all." Kind of a poignant thing for a Digimon-obsessed nerd with no communication skills to just randomly say. But that's just it. It wasn't random. Gojo was going through something just as difficult, and this quote he says about love is obviously coming from deep within his heart. He didn't just hear that somewhere, he's telling Yuta this because it's something from his own experience. Which is just like when his friendly, goofy, silly demeanor dropped like a sledgehammer when he told Megumi about how he lives his life. These moments are Gojo at his most sincere. And while many people have issues with the idea of Gojo being a quote-unquote father figure to his students, me included in some situations, he obviously is at bare minimum the annoying older brother you can turn to when shit starts to get real. A guardian doesn't have to be your parent or even someone who really acts like it. It could be a relative, a friend, or a teacher. And many of these kids, if not all of them, have no parents, no guardians, except him. Which makes it so painfully clear that this isn't something Gojo just read on a WikiHow about how to make your student feel better after a breakup. This is something directly from his story. But when you look back at Gojo's characterization, this statement, "Love is the most twisted curse of all," literally cannot be about anyone but Suguru Geto. And as if to shut down the rumors of the people thinking this was referring to Shoko or something, Kage included the trivia that Shoko would rather be dead than ever be stuck dating either of these two. So pretty much the only way to take this is that Gojo feels that his love with Geto, be it romantic or platonic, was a curse, the saddest, most influential thing to ever happen to him. This is something that gets explored more, surprisingly, in a place many may not have thought to look. Season 2, opening number 1, Where Our Blue Is. The first intro to Season 2, fittingly, is all about Gojo and Geto's relationship with each other. It's also one of the greatest themes ever put to the screen, but that's a topic for a different week. Something that becomes very obvious about this song when you look into it is that it is indisputably clear that the lyrics are about these two. So what does it tell us that the album art for the track is this? I will now read you an excerpt from this beautiful song, and I want you to keep it fresh in your mind that this poetry is written from the perspective of Satoru Gojo about Suguru Geto, which I will remind you again is not something up for debate. Here it goes. There's nothing to block the front of my eyes. Your silence, it becomes inaudible. Even if these days fade away, even if I've come to know your scent, different from mine, in the depths of eternity left behind, it's like a quiet love in the summer, like colors running down my cheeks. The words that curse you are stuck in the back of my throat. Will we meet again? A voice that cannot be heard. We were supposed to share everything, but since that day, little by little, the curse of me being different from you grows. The sorrow behind your smile, regretting for what I had overlooked. To you who blooms and scatters like transient flowers, goodbye. There's a lot to unpack there, and the Fujoshis are literally jumping up and down right now screaming, but this is real. Many who want to discredit this idea will say something like, oh, well, OST isn't canon, it's not official. Dude, it's quite literally the theme. How could you convince yourself that Gege Akutami didn't have a hand in the creation of the theme of his own show? That argument baffles me. This song is canon, so canon in fact that it revealed the curse that Gojo put on Geto before his death. This was such a big mystery. The manga, much like its use of the black box for Fuga, censored these last words. It was something a manga reader would never know. I and most others patiently awaited this scene to be animated, and when it was, and left dead silent, my heart sank. All we ever got was Suguru's reaction.
The least you could do is hit me with some curses.
It's like a quiet love in the summer, like colors running down my cheeks. The words that curse you are stuck in the back of my throat. Will we meet again? A voice that cannot be heard. Will we meet again? Those are the words Suguru died with, the words we never heard, the words Gojo took to his own grave. And tragically, Gojo's curse came true. They did meet again.
Yeah, Satoru.
This makes me wonder, without Gojo's curse, would Kenjaku have ever even inhabited Geto? Whether or not that's the case, Gojo set it in stone in the eyes of fate. This is a tragic, very tragic turn in Gojo's life, but spoilers, it's not all that bad. Because this curse bound them by fate and came true in death as well. They did meet again. But instead of discussing this masterful airport scene, I'm not done with this song yet. There's one other lyric I think needs to be analyzed. I'll be throwing it up on screen now because, respectfully, I don't want to embarrass myself with my less than stellar Japanese, but it's the lyric that read something like, just a silent love. Now, in English, we only really have one word to portray the concept of love. Sure, there's adoration, like, I guess, but in many other cultures, there's a wide array of ways to express love. Because we're talking about anime, let's take a look at Japan's love language, starting with Suki. Suki is most closely the English equivalent of like or love, but in a casual sense. It's the word you would use to say something like, I love Jujutsu Kaisen, or I love my friends. The next rung on the love ladder is daisuki, which is the former but cranked up a notch. You use this word for something that you like a lot. You could use daisuki in a relationship if you want to bring it to the next level, but some people also just use this to talk about stuff they really, really love. Then we have I. I is a deeper, more serious, profound feeling. I is what most people think of when looking for a Japanese equivalent of the word love. I is applied to serious relationships and family, and is such a heavy word that it's not super commonly said in Japan. And finally, the last word for love that I need to touch on is koi. Koi is only used when referring to romantic or passionate love. Koi is the feeling of first falling in love, serious yearning for someone and thinking that you just can't be without them. Koi is the sweet, uncontrollable butterflies in your stomach when falling into the abyss that is love. And that is the word used in Where Our Blue Is. Like a quiet love in the summer, love is the most twisted curse of all. Come on, even if it was your bestie for the restie who had died, you aren't really going to be saying things like, even if I've come to know your scent, different from mine in the depths of eternity left behind, you know? Gojo clearly has some intense communication issues. This is a core aspect of his character, and maybe even the entire series as a whole. I'm not kidding. Absolute strength and the solitude that comes with it. The one who will teach you about love is... How many times have we heard that throughout JJK? Like 5? Gojo, aside from potentially Sukuna, is the loneliest man in the world, so isolated that nobody can touch him. His infinity perfectly mirrors and projects that part of himself, but Suguru was the one person who could always get through that infinite void between Gojo and the rest of the world. The lyrics to Where Our Blue Is are likely things he could never effectively express to Geto himself. Maybe these are things that he's thought about in the last few years since his partner in crime has been gone. All of this isn't to mention that Geto and Gojo died on the same exact day of the year. Seems a little romantic, I guess, in a morbid kind of way, but that's not what makes this important. The day they died wasn't just any day, it was December 24th, the most romantic day in Japanese culture. Christmas Eve is quite literally the Japanese Valentine's Day, a day people use to profess their love or just celebrate it. If you were an author trying to hint that these characters were gay, there might be no better way to do it than killing them both on the most romantic day of the year. While all of this isn't evidence directly pointing to the two being in a straightforward black and white romantic relationship, it does show us the theme of this entire video: nuance. Gojo and Geto weren't in a relationship. I'll say that with my whole chest. It just didn't really go that way. But every shred of evidence and context is pointing to the idea that they both wanted to be. But because of their responsibilities, how busy and hectic their lives were, their stunted communication skills, everything in the universe just seemed like it was against them. And these two men, so torn on ideals, chose that it would be easier to reject the other than to embrace him. Before Gojo got to say how he felt, if he ever would've, it was too late. Geto had already strayed too far down the wrong path. I think it's clear these two loved each other and would have likely done something about it if it weren't for their insane and tumultuous current circumstances. This is so much more than your average anime queerbait. This isn't something to string the audience along in a will they won't they. This is the most integral aspect of the current most popular anime character's entire arc. I understand if this is a lot for you, especially if you've never really looked into this before. Like I've said, it's honestly really surprising to get this sort of narrative from a shonen series so vehemently against love story plotlines. I mean, there definitely is a decidedly thin selection of romance stories in JJK, but it's not like that's something totally absent from the story. There's Yuta and Rika, whatever Hikari and Karara have got going on, Hana's unrequited feelings for Megami, Yuta and Maki's acceptance and comfort with one another, Yuji and Ozawa's short-lived moment of beauty, even Mai being confirmed bisexual with her stating what kind of man is her type and then drooling over Takata like all the other con-goers. Do you still want to try to say that there's no room for romance in JJK? And obviously, how could we forget the most influential and meaningful minor love story that Gege ever presented to us, Miwa and Kokichi's tragic situationship? Many of you out there may have heard this before, but Gege was once quoted saying that he wanted to add a little romance to his manga, but out of all the female characters, Miwa seemed like the only one whose personality would be fit for it. Now, a lot of people point to this quote as evidence against Gojo and Geto's relationship. He wanted some kind of romance in his story, he added it, and there isn't anymore. But that just isn't an accurate description of what happened. If that were the case, we wouldn't have gotten any of the character moments I just listed. And also, this was about a straight relationship. He specifically says of the female characters, she's the only one who seemed to fit the bill, which might not seem like it means much, but the way that Japanese authors have to handle romance just isn't the same as it is here in the West. A little quirk that many people tend not to dwell on about Japanese authors, especially of manga, is that they're more often than not completely anonymous. Gege Akutami is not this person's real name, it's a pseudonym they chose to pen under. Even when mangaka choose not to be directly faceless, there are still dozens of precautions these men and women take to hide their identities. For instance, Hirihiko Araki is almost certainly not the author of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure's real name. And even when they do use their real name and show themselves like Echiro Oda, they still have an avatar to hide behind and are almost always reclusive. Have you ever thought about why that is? If you don't have the misfortune of knowing already, the reason so many Japanese authors tend to hide from the public is a legitimate appeal for their own safety. I'm aware that this is a generalization, but the fandom culture in Japan is just different than it is in a lot of other places in the world. Now, truthfully, media obsession to an unhealthy, unparalleled level is something the whole world at large has to deal with. Think the Bjork stalker. Obsessiveness to the point of being a danger paired with the highly turbulent world of manga is a whirlwind headed straight for disaster. Think of how many series, be they good or bad, constantly kill off characters. That's what I mean by turbulence, shaking up the community, the story, the status quo. Stuff like this is exactly why mangakas tend to look more like this and less like this. Perhaps the most infamous case of harassment like this upon an author is from Attack on Titan's creator, Hajime Isayama. This poor man received death threats in the tens of thousands upon killing off the most minor, nothing characters, and obviously the bigger the character, the more pushback, threats, and overall controversy the whole franchise can find itself under. This is why AOT shifted from its original plan of being a one-season anime where everyone dies, to a 4-season odyssey where good guys beat the bad guys and a surprising amount of people get spared and redeemed. Now, am I trying to say that killing a character and revealing that they're gay are both equally controversial? Not here, but in Japan, being gay is a way bigger controversy than just axing someone off. Revealing that Satoru Gojo, the most popular anime character in modern shonen history, was homosexual or bisexual to a region that is predominantly hostile towards LGBTQ ideals is just something that Gege might not be comfortable risking. To an American, this may sound archaic, but it wouldn't be far-fetched to say that revealing such a thing could get Akutami countless death threats, more people than ever trying to find out his real identity, boycotting, and even the outright removal of JJK from Shonen Jump entirely. Many of you out there may be saying, well, what about characters like Kirara, someone who's outwardly, if a little nonchalantly narrative-wise, queer? Or what about queer characters from other massively popular series, like One Piece's Bon Clay, who's one of, if not the biggest non-binary icon in the anime scene? Well, what separates them from someone like Gojo, like I was saying, is that he's kind of the biggest thing in the entire goddamn world right now. I mean, as phenomenal of a character as Bentham of the Wild was, he was a semi-minor character, which is likely the only reason Oda was able to do this without a world of pushback. Unfortunately, it also probably helped to make him look so flamboyant and over the top. Some people, maybe most people in Japan, were laughing at him, not with him. Just like how Oda drew all the trans people so grotesque in Kamabaka Kingdom. At the time this came out in the manga, poking a little fun at these people was likely the only way to actually get this accepted and distributed. This, to me, is what makes Bon Clay's portrayal as not only a character, but as a queer human being so impactful. They have one of the most selfless, heroic personalities in the entirety of One Piece, and I pray that this made at least a few Japanese people change their minds about how they feel about people a little differently from them. But at the end of the day, again, this is all at the mercy of Bon Clay not being a super pivotal character in the series most of the time. I mean, come on, Oda has been teasing us with the greatest homo will they won't they in media history, but has had to pretend that they hate each other for 30 years because of editorial pushback. Kidding. Not really. But what I'm really trying to get at here is that things are never as clear-cut as they seem. Gege's apprehension to make any sort of serious claim about these two's relationship could not really be his choice or something within his control. Yuri on Ice had to label a same-sex marriage proposal as some kind of bizarre friendship initiation for luck, and the series got dropped by MAPPA before it could even get the chance to end. And that's with them dancing around the subject and not directly confirming it for plausible deniability. Or does anybody remember when Kaoru professed his love to Shinji in Evangelion, and in the English dub for Netflix he basically had to say, "You're worthy of my presence," instead? Gayness in media, especially overseas media, is just in no way treated the same, which tragically could also be said about the gay people of Japan. Homosexuality is seen as less of a preference and more of a perversion there. Sure, there are GL and BL stories in Japan respectively, but just because they exist doesn't mean they're seen as narrative equals to the public. Unfortunately, gay and sapphic characters and stories in Japanese media are often fetishized, made fun of, or hidden away entirely. And this isn't even that foreign of a concept. Think of something like Adventure Time. Back in 2010, having a prominent same-sex relationship on a Cartoon Network program would have put a heavy crosshair on the series from executives, and it would have never gotten to its amazing ending. The writers planned to have Marceline and Bubblegum be an item years and years before that was eventually, canonically, revealed. And when they did get around to dropping that bomb, all it amounts to is a kiss at the end of the finale, because the writers were worried that if they revealed these characters were gay any earlier, they might not have gotten to release a finale at all. Alex Hirsch, creator of Gravity Falls, received major pushback from Disney execs about the minor gay characters Durland and Blubs. I remember so many people at the time being like, they're not gay, they're just quirky. But that excuse only gets to stretch as far as the execs will keep the series alive, because by the end they were finally allowed to reveal the truth, just like AT. We saw something similar happen on Cartoon Network a decade after Adventure Time began, but this time with the opposite approach. Instead of bending to executive demands, the people behind Steven Universe doubled down. They made a grand episode featuring a big gay wedding, adding a lot of plot significance to the episode so that it would either A, force the countries that didn't agree with LGBTQ rights to air the episodes anyway so the season made sense, exposing their viewers to gay characters, or B, not have those episodes air in those countries, which would lead to mass confusion in fans, people asking what happened, basically forcing the foreign networks to admit being homophobic. Now, as much as I don't like Rebecca Sugar, or Steven Universe for that matter, this was a big dick move. And unfortunately for them, it blew up in their face. Cartoon Network told them multiple times that they cannot have same-sex relationships in their show because it would financially be very bad for them and it would make it so that internationally the show does even worse. You simply cannot get away with some of this stuff in modern Russia, China, and many, many other countries. This controversy is what ultimately got the show canceled, what Adventure Time was trying so desperately to avoid. And this was in 2016, in the United States of America. In Japan, they are hardly even as accepting of gay people as we were in like the 80s. It's very easy to think in 2024 that everyone is equal. But it's just as easy to forget that same-sex marriage is only legal in 37 of the 195 countries in the world. Only 17% of the world's population is allowed to be gay without being jailed or worse. Yes, this is a silly little YouTube essay about if a fictional character likes boys or not, but it's anything but a simple yes or no answer. Gay by design keeps this so vague because he basically, literally, has to. I think the amount of storytelling that he's managed to get away with without directly confirming how these characters feel is kind of genius. As you'll see on message boards and comment sections across the internet, this is a very divisive topic, and that's because it's by design. You're supposed to interpret it on your own. Jujutsu Kaisen does this amazing thing in its storytelling where it will present you with characters and their actions and ideals, but we never get too much of the inner workings. We see Megumi, we see his attitude, we see his conviction, but it's up to us, the audience, to basically pick whether this kid is right or wrong. I love that Gege sometimes trusts his readers to come to their own conclusions, instead of taking whatever some dumbass YouTuber says as fact, or their previous biases taking hold of how they interpret the story. Megumi is actually a fantastic character in the sense that he is a microcosm of everything that JJK is. Tragedy, grief, loneliness, fear, fragility, sacrifice, fluidity, balance, rebirth, purpose, friendship, worldview, conviction, nuance, uncertainty. But most importantly of all,
worry about a specific structure later. Imagine a future version of myself who's freely surpassed my limits.
And a little bit of sense and imagination. It just takes the slightest trigger.
Domain expansion! Broaden it more freely. The interpretation.
Jujutsu Kaisen is about many things. If you relate to Choso, you may say JJK has themes of brotherhood, loyalty, reverence. If you like Maki, maybe it's perseverance, change, and freedom. But I think Megumi's got the closest thing to a true narrative through line for Jujutsu Kaisen, and that is interpretation. If you read through the manga and interpret these two characters as diehard besties, and that's what's powerful about it to you, cherish that. But there's no reason someone can't have a different worldview, a different conviction. You might be sitting there looking at your screen like, so is this guy gonna answer the question? I just did. It's vague. It's up to you. But, I mean, hey, if it's up to me, I'm gonna go ahead and say that they're gay. Just about every shred of evidence points to this being the truth. A truth that Gege likely had to keep vague to keep his job. And yes, they can be gay without ever kissing or ever even admitting it to each other. I think the entire point of their relationship is just how close they got while both feeling more and more alone. They are yin and yang, light and dark, two sides of the same coin, always together but simultaneously separated. They weren't allowed by fate to come together. I think every little detail in this part of the story, no matter how small, if you look into it enough, you will find the through line that is this relationship. Their body language, Gojo's clues, the OST, Gege isn't allowed to confirm it, but he's basically hitting us over the head with it as hard as he can get away with. Think of the infamous KFC breakup. First of all, I don't know how you can think it isn't a doomed yaoi when they literally broke up, but the fact that it was in front of a KFC might legitimately be the furthest thing from a little throwaway detail. In Japan, KFC is a traditional Christmas meal, commonly enjoyed by lovers on December 24th. Yes, I'm 100% serious. If you don't believe me, you're free to do your own research. And yes, I am trying to say that I think that this taking place in front of a KFC is a purposeful, romantic detail. Gege could have just made this a random, unmarked building, but he didn't. He modeled it after a real place. So I'm very confused when people say that it was just an accident. You don't accidentally draw a perfect KFC from real life. It foreshadows the day these two died, and even subtly cues the romance that they shared. As much as he pisses me off, I think Gege is really smart with how he handled this whole situation. He used the forced censorship not against himself, but in favor of his story to tell a really subtle, subdued, tragic, Shakespearean love story in the midst of his battle shonen. I said I wouldn't dwell on that airport scene at Gojo's end, but it's invaluable to remember that he died with only one regret. That Geto wasn't there to pat him on the back. Happy Pride Month. Stay curious.